name's Dale Glick. I grew up in Galena. I have an interest just in general, being I'm retired and you need something to do. So I've been looking through old photographs, and I was involved in cemetery work and had found some stereo views on the cemeteries in the area. And then I think last fall and this spring, I wondered how many stereo views were out there, because there were a certain collection of these examples of them on the internet. Terry Miller at the State Historic Department of Natural Resources, whatever that title is, has 5 or 6 stereo views. The library has 6 or 7 stereo views. The Galena Historical Society they have 5 or 6 stereo views. And then searching on the internet, there's a few examples out there. New York Public Library has one. Chicago Historical Museum has one. I just found out that one of our viewers here has an example that I haven't seen of a stereo view of one of our churches. So it's just going to be some buildings in general. If we know the photographer, just some little information about them. This is Hewlett's Furnace. And my understanding, this was out past Dewey Avenue, across the little bridge, and just before the road forks, it was off to the left on the hillside. According to Daryl Watson, I had never known that. I'd been out in that area a long time ago, but I mean, this is totally gone. But Hewlett was fairly well known, and you can't quite see it. And the detail may get lost, but those are pig leads. Leads of pig, approximately 70 pounds. Okay, anybody recognize that? If Moses Drugstore is here, and see if I get this right, Nax Law Office. What's next to Nax? Dale's. Okay, so one of these is Jasper Maltby's store. The lingerie shop, I remembered that, is down there in the old insurance building. But this is approximately an 1866, we don't know for sure, a view from Hill Street, it'd be the west side of Main, that block. And it's pretty neat, historically, sidewalks. They're wood. They didn't burn, but they were wood. If you're in the cast iron fences, which I was, there was one there. And I did some work about Old City Cemetery, and we found examples of cast iron fences that were there. This is an example of that. This middle finial, we found plenty of those examples. And I took one to not Westwick, gonna insult them now. Lemco. Cleaned one up, sandblasted it, and they did a very good job of reproducing that. So now we have one that lists the photographers. Lamberson was the earlier photographer. He started at around 1860. He married James's sister, which may have been why they got into partnership. J.E. James was in the Civil War, the 96th Illinois Infantry. So he didn't join Lamberson until 1865. And my notes show that they weren't partners until 1868. So this brackets this from 1865 to 1868, which is a pretty good time frame, not just a general one. And what is this church back here for the people that know? How many windows does it have? So the first church only had 4 windows. So when you go up there, there's been a brick addition with a couple more windows. I may be off. There's another addition when I was younger and went to school. There's another addition, which I think takes us up to today. That's just of interest. All of these are gone. That's still there. Part of that is there. All of these are gone. The middle part of that cemetery was the access road, because we know when that church was built, 1858. Another Lamberson and James. I don't know if I copied the back of this, but on the back, the guy put a little dot. I think I might have. It would be the next slide. And on the dot, he said, that's Grant's home. Second one that the city gave. He called this Thomas Leakley's house at that time. Does anybody know who built that? Guy had a steamboat. Orrin Smith. Grant Park has not been built. 1866. These are just things that pop into your head after looking at it. And then I was pretty slow. Is Lamberson and James had a studio where the VFW is. So they're up on the roof. That's that aisle, right? And Lemco Foundry is nowhere to be seen. The Hui Hotel, which is that one, I think we've edited. So on the back, which helps, Lamberson and James has their fine art gallery, 157 Main. The street addresses were changed somewhere around 1900. So all of South Main had different numbers when you look at the old papers, which is confusing. And the ones north of Hill Street, I believe, are the same. So lower end of Hill Street, Galena, Illinois, Huey's Hotel on the left, Tom Leakley's house across the river, General Grant's house, where the dot is on the right side of picture. This is probably the collector's little note on it. But not everyone has all this nice detail, so you have to do some figuring. And this one I really like. Anybody been up to Old City Cemetery? Whose grave is that? Here. It's still there. This is long gone. It's beautiful. I wish we would have had it. I didn't find any examples of it. I have enlarged this and edited and tweaked, and I believe I can see Huntington on this curve. So H.H. Huntington was a postmaster. This is his son. Old City Cemetery burials were up until April of 1857. They opened the new cemetery, Greenwood. They only buried a handful of people after this because the new cemetery was open. When Henry or H.H. Huntington died, he moved his son up to Greenwood, and he's buried in the middle division, Division 3. He doesn't have the beautiful stone and the beautiful fence. And there's about 200 people on Old City, roughly, that were moved from Old City to the new cemetery. Because anything with a date earlier than 1857 in Greenwood, it didn't exist. They may have bought the land in 53, 54, did some grading, getting things ready, but they weren't burying people. There is a guy standing here, or a gentleman. I believe this is one from the state of Illinois, Terry Miller. And we get that information from the back of it. I have very little information, as I believe these mines are down behind Chestnut roughly. Sand Prairie, or that's where those cliffs were. And when we were growing up, 1970s, you could drive that road that's now blocked off, and you'd see all the little openings for all the little caves. Well, those are the mine entrances. Some of them. That's where we get where it was Berchter and Harris's diggings at Sand Prairie near Galena. Berchter had a store. Berchter and Hellman are that store next to the St. Louis building, or Vinnie Vanucci's. It's that third one, because Vinnie Vanucci's is 2 stores, or roughly, depending on how you divide it up. Harris's has to be Daniel Smith Harris and his brothers. There were 7 Harris brothers, and all of them were steamboat captains. Daniel's the best well-known. One of them's over in Dubuque. I think that's, I don't know if that's Robert, but one of them was Scribe Harris, A.J. Harris, Andrew Jackson Harris. He's less well-known, and a couple others. So a fine load of lead drifted into the bluff for over a mile on the banks of the Mississippi River. The first high school, built 1860, burned 1905, 6, 4. This building is still there. It's one of the 1, 2, 3, 4-story buildings in Galena. Franklin Street, North Main. Wooden sidewalks. That one, when we tried editing a little, you couldn't get too much more contrast. All of these, I don't know exactly, except it has to be after 1860 and before 1904. We know when this was built because this is a Ritter building. Let's see. The building on diagonal used to be the Tyler House. It used to be 4 stories. It burned. And then George Richardson had a shoe store in there, which was 4 stories. It burned 1870. That doesn't look like it's 4 stories down here. If it isn't, that roughly brackets it. What is this, the Paradise or Gobbies or something over here? It's wood. There is a newspaper article that we found now that we're digitizing the papers where there's a fire across from the Tyler House, and it would date that roughly. That wall is not that high today. High Street and Hill Street. High Street and Hill Street, corner building, B&B today. Little gazebo right here. Looks better with the taller wall, in my opinion. So that's the Kiddo House. The question was asked, what year did they require brick instead of wood? That's for the people online since they can't hear. I've only seen 1850 city ordinances, which I believe would have been that time period. There was a bad fire in 1855, middle of the block from the DeSoto down to past the Merchants Hotel, crossed the street, took out everything up for about 7 buildings, burnt the St. Michael's Church and everything up to the that house that just got restored by Mr. Busson. That was one in 1855. There was another fire at that time, or roughly 3 fires. 1853. Well, it's in the 50s. There was 3. There's also one in the next block at a couple of times that came where the VFW down to Wagner Shoe Store, which was the only one that never burned on any of these. It had double firewalls. And across the street from Warren Street to the dike, that one burned, but it didn't cause a big newspaper article because they were wooden buildings and they weren't important commercial people, and it slowly burned. And the article goes on and on about that. So I think that was the impetus for the brick at that time. But you saw that one that I had on Hill Street, that was approximately 1860, 66, 1870. So there were still wooden buildings. So until they rebuilt them or they burned, they didn't have to put brick back. Another mine. And as was previously stated, we know it's winter. And it's a Lamberson and James, so we do bracket that it's between 1865 and 1868. Okay, the McKinney Lode, winter. Sand Prairie near Galena. A miner just emerging from the drift with a train load of wash dirt. And my area isn't mining, but wash dirt, I would think they're in there busting up the rock and getting the lead, and they've got to get the scrap dirt and rock out. Address again so we can place where they were. It's the old jail. Courthouse, Firehouse, long gone, because the courthouse needed more room. They tried selling it. Nobody wanted it for $1. That house is probably gone. That house is gone. For firehouses, just a point of interest, there were 5 of them, all in existence at one time, which I didn't know. The question was, where did the steeple go on that firehouse? It was removed to Linmar Gardens in Galena, which is up by Galena Greens or just down from Galena Greens. Okay, I believe that's one of the photographers back of their house. Lamberson House. Okay, I'm not an East Sider, but that's an East Side house. And I don't know the names of those East Siders. I know that Otis Horton probably built it and the first owner. The fences are long gone, which is sort of neat now on all of these, the old cast iron, the old wood ones. But these are here for examples if someone wanted to historically replicate them. You got a river, you got a custom house. How many stories? It's 5, so we know it's before 1888. City Hall, not then. This was a hotel. Green Street Bridge, First High School, Loveland House or Wonderly, cupola is gone. Green Street, I knew this as the Herbert House, who was a teacher. It's also Judge Seal's house. It's his second house. Fiddick House, Hewlett lived there at one time. I think there was probably a Fiddick that lived there. And then we get to, on the edge, Asa Hale House, or the Johnsons at one time lived there. It's on the back of that alley off of the little street that she had mentioned, Washington Street. The back of that says something in DeSoto House. Yeah, Pulley is, I think, and he took over 1875 to 1890. That's obviously been water damage, might have been heat damage, but Washington Street, firehouse that still exists. Washington Street steps, which all of you have walked and counted the steps, and you all matched the numbers correctly. I just asked the question. I don't know what the number is. I do the same when tourists come in on Prospects or high school steps. This building is long gone. It's now a park. Used to have a popcorn stand, used to have a newsstand. Timber sidewalks again. This is either the second or third St. Louis building, since it burned twice. Once in the 1853 and once in the 1870s. Lamberson House up on the hill, I think was built 1870 roughly. The question was whether this was the Schmoll store. This is the Schmoll location. And then they bought the one that just got restored several stores down, the nice gray with the metal Mesker front. That was a Schmoll building, her son. I've only been in there once. Turner Hall. Maybe twice. Well, we went to St. Michael's more when we went to Central than I don't ever remember going to Turner Hall. I didn't go to plays. Ask Paula, I never went to plays. I agree. They just said that I was uncultured for the folks online, and I agreed. There's a newspaper article where it says there's a half a dozen views of Turner Hall, and the background would be different. So if this is a street scene, there's a Romanesque scene, and there's a couple other described that we don't have the stereo views. So hopefully they might be out there somewhere. The back of that street scene. So we know that's the street scene. You've got the photographer, J.E. James, and his address. Let me see if I remember. They were above the VFW. They were above the Merchants, what we know as the Merchants, which is what, a dress shop now on the corner of Washington and Main, the bank. On the back part of that, there's a slanted roof. It used to be all glass. In the 60s or 70s, the city was worried about it falling into the road, so they made them take it down. James was also on Perry Street above McCoy's, because there's a couple pictures that'll show that. And Pooley was the third building from the Green Street steps. He was in that building and had a fire and burned all his negatives from an early 1840 settlers photo. But they basically took over the same shop as their previous people over time. And I didn't know till Craig Alba told me where it was. That house is on South High and White. It's the backyard. Well, so it's known as the Scott House or the Fowler House. New St. Michael's. Barrow's House or the Historic Museum. Judge Seal's house isn't built. That doesn't, if that's Loveland's house, we would date it, but I don't see a compare, the Herbert house. Millinery goods. Hats. Look at all the trees are gone. So they had to burn wood, the lead furnaces. It's not real distinct, but Market House, Lawrence Hotel, their livery stable, East Side. These lines that you see on a couple of these is, my understanding is that's in the manufacture of the paper. They used to grind up pulp or cotton and they'd put it on a screen to the thickness what it was and let it dry. Because I've seen that, it's not a copy error or part of the original photo. This is dated because it's Barner. It's Turner Hall, but it's laying, because it burned once. Episcopal Church. There's no house here, which is Judge Baum, B-A-U-M-E's house in some of the Carl Johnson's books and some of the literature. That one's going to throw you. The house is there. It's not that material. Bay window. Used to be, see if I get my colors right. Coral, light blue, aquamarine. Otis Horton built it. There's a newspaper article where it was stuccoed. In 1900s, 1910s, there were half a dozen houses that were stuccoed on the east side. There's one up a block that Amelia bought and took the stucco off. And it looks pretty nice. But those three were all the same house, same time period. The question was that the Millhouse brothers' house? There is a picture of George Millhouse's house before it was stuccoed. I believe it's on the other side. We do have pictures of it, not a stereo, but it's on the other side, stuccoed today. Stereo view, the right side looks like it's darkened or had some wear. Galena Foundry Machine Shop. Shot Tower Hill, which I haven't found that there was ever a shot tower up there. Lemco Foundries over here. This is Hui Hotel. That's the Hui Hotel livery stable, which is now part of Lemco. This looks like the axle factory. That house, that's the only, it's not there today. So you'd have to look in the old property records. Whose is it? They had mentioned the East Side School. The 3rd Street steps are right here. I don't see an East Side, the 2nd East Side School, the nice big one, because there's a 1st East Side School, a little brick one that's just getting restored now. I'd have to look through it was asked, what did they sell at the Market Exchange? I'd have to look at the old newspapers, which are now online from 1870 to 1929. We're going to go all the way back to 1829 and come forward to about 1945. Those are in the works, so they'll show up in a couple of years or sooner. But we do have the 1870s to 1929s are online. It's a free site, Illinois Digital Newspapers. And a lot of these library stereo views are on Illinois Digital Images, because the library several years back got a grant to put a lot of Irene Gillette's photos in the 50s and other historic photos online, and that's free too. I know where that's at. Dodge Street, Mars Avenue, and that's a spare house. And all I recollect is Leslie Garvey used to live there, and other people through the years. And I don't know the present owners, but I know I've met him once or twice. He just redid the fence, I think a year or two ago. He had Hulshers put up a nice fence and painted it white. The garage has been added, that brick on the back, or extended. So on the back of the card, which I didn't know. So Mrs. Freeman from Kirby Kiddo. Kirby's in the photo with the compliments of the season. They don't tell us what season, so it could be winter. Our house on the West Hill, Galena, Illinois, USA. The children in the Democrat wagon. So he tells the style of the wagon. It's not that it's Democrat or Republican, or maybe that's why they named it a Democrat. I don't know. I haven't looked into it. Myself holding the horses. So I didn't know Kirby Kiddo lived there. I was also told that one of the generals lived there at one time. So there's been a turnover on a lot of those houses up in that hill area where they kept leapfrogging and jumping around, all these wealthy guys, semi-wealthy. Or this is still in existence. The trees will throw you off. Take the trees out. That's in Greenwood. That's Hewlett's headstone. You can go up there and stand in that position, and Hewlett, and this is the Reed headstone. There's a guy right here. It's the one we wanted. Yes, it is a guy up there. What is it? It's scaffolding. I'm assuming he's either repairing or painting the steeple, and there was only one guy that did all the church steeples, never fell. There's a newspaper article on them. So we've come to the end. Thank you for coming.